This session is sponsored by Access Design, the makers of Anima, the all-in-one crowd management tool developed to make the process of adding 3D people to your still images and animations fast and easy. Find out more about Anima and their 3D people library by clicking on their link or banner in the show notes. Hi everyone and welcome to The Spectrum. I'm your host Ronan Beckerman and this is my weekly experiment exploring the creative minds of architectural visualization, finding out what makes us all tick and push our limits. This week I'm joined by Santiago Sanchez from Tresde ArchViz Studio in Ecuador. In this session we'll talk about his journey, starting out as an industrial designer as he was looking for a creative outlet, becoming self-employed after a bad work experience, and how being inspired by Alex Roman led him into the State-of-Art Academy Master Class. After which, things took a new speed with the best of Big Pick on the blog and reconnecting with his DNA from home to become more of a teacher these days. We'll also dive deep into the process of making the METEORA project, which was posted on the blog. Here we go everyone, session number 8 with Santiago Sanchez. Let's roll. Hello Santi, it's nice to have you here on The Spectrum.
Thank you, Ronnie. I'm really happy with this opportunity. I'm a big fan of podcasts. So let's begin.
Okay, so to start, I will ask you to introduce yourself to the listeners. Tell us a little about yourself and how you came to work in the architecture visualization field.
I'm an industrial designer. I was born and raised here in Ecuador, South America. I'm 35 years old, and my passion about architectural visualization started like 10 years ago. I think my first approach was using AutoCAD. Since then, I fell in love with everything about 3D graphics, CG graphics. So basically, that was the start.
Okay, so you said you studied industrial design.
Yeah.
Where did you study?
I studied here in the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Ecuador. There is a university here in my city, so I studied there.
How long was the degree? Was it a 3, 4, 5 years? How
5 years, because actually is like engineering. It's like an engineering degree. Was 5 years and 1 year of thesis. Basically, was around 6 years.
And why did you go to study industrial design?
Because at that time I was, when I finished the high school, I was a little bit worried because the usual careers like we have here in Ecuador, for some reason, I was looking for something else, careers like, electronic engineering, mechanic engineering is very popular here in my country. But something about related to design was completely new at that time. So at that moment in my life, I was just expecting, a little bit more. I thought that the creativity that I always have my entire life since I was a child was the key. That kind of the creativity I couldn't apply in any other field. So that was the reason that I decided to study industrial design.
Okay. And so 10 years ago, what was it that shifted your attention and got you into architectural visualization? What made you make that switch?
Because I used to work in for a company, right? I used to design furniture for office, and I had a really, really, really bad experience with this company. And at the time, I just decided I never going to work again for a company, actually. So I decided to open my own office, and I start to check, which kind of field I can decide to take a specific path inside my career. So I discovered architectural visualization. First as a hobby, and after that I realized that in some part of the world, especially in Europe, is like a proper job, right? So at that time, I used, for example, AutoCAD in order to do rendering. Of course, that was horrible, horrible quality, horrible approach, everything looked so 3D graphic, I think it was because the lack of the knowledge, at that time I couldn't find any proper course or something like that here in my country or maybe in my city, the only material available was in YouTube. So it was really hard to learn by myself something, completely new like 3ds Max or V-Ray, because that kind of software was actually like very, very unusual here. Everybody learned how to draw 2D in AutoCAD. So basically, rendering in AutoCAD was something new, at that time.
Okay. Who was the people or the studios or works you were influenced by? What was the first, images that you've seen that sparked that interest and motivation to go into architecture visualization at that time?
At the beginning when I opened my office, the first thing that I did was try to keep in touch with the different artists around the world. Of course, using Facebook. I think Facebook was a very, very important part of all these trips so far. And of course, it was the first time that I saw the Alex Roman short film. That was amazing. That was like I can't describe the sensation, the feelings at the moment I saw the third and the seventh short film. I think that was the moment I decided that I want to do this for the rest of my life.
Well, it seems it influenced a lot of people that work by Alex Roman. And so you say you opened an office. Was it you, and did you have a partner or employees, or
no? Just me. At that moment, I was just by myself. I started to work with. I started with somebody else. These guys has like they build buildings and small commercial places in my city. But at that moment, I just draw in 2D and create the CAD drawings, something very basic. But eventually, I started to do some kind of renderings. Of course, the guys like it, but the quality, of course, was very, very bad, But at that moment was something new, right? So I decided I have to improve it. I have to study. I have to find something else. I always thought that is not good enough. Because I saw works like Alex, and I can of course realize that somebody in the other part of the world can do it 100 times better, right? So maybe that was the reason at the beginning that I decided this is not good enough. I have to do something better. I have to improve it a lot.
So what was the next step? What was your next action in your journey to get better?
After studying and checking several YouTube videos, YouTube tutorials, at that moment I felt stuck. And I get in touch with a very, very good friend of mine, David from Spain. And he told me like he's going to travel to an CG event in Italy, in Venice. So at that moment, I had no idea, about this kind of event. When he back to Barcelona again, he told me that it was a very interesting experience there, and it was an academy, and they teach architectural visualization courses. But sadly, at that moment, everything was just in Italian, right? So I have to wait something like, I don't know, like 9 months until, of course, the guys from State of Art Academy offer like international architectural visualization master course in English. So basically, I attend to the first one,
Okay, so masterclass number 1, you were there.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yep, the international master class.
Cool. How was that experience? That was the full month, right?
Yeah, it was a full month and was absolutely great. The guys, all the knowledge, at that time I used to think that the realism, was given by a supercomputer, the latest computer. But I was so wrong. I learned that basically the approach and the philosophy is the key. Everything else is just a tool.
Okay. And so what happened after you finished the masterclass? You went back to
I went back
Ecuador
to Ecuador. I was very, very happy. I was very excited. I can't wait a little moment to develop my first CG project. So I did a couple of tests with the interior, exterior, because the hard part, of course, it is when you finish the training and you have to apply all the knowledge by yourself without any teacher or mentor near to you, in order to help you. So it was very challenging at the beginning, of course. So I decided to create some interiors. I used some reference that I found on the web. And of course, I posted in your forum. And a couple of days after, a classmate, from the academy told me, "Hey, you won the image of the week at Ron and Beckerman Forum." I say, "What?" Was something like I never expected. But that was the beginning of everything, to be honest.
Do you remember what project it was? Was it the crystal box?
Yes. No, it was an interior project called Vanilla Room.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a very interesting and experimental interior. I created several close-ups, and I was very happy with the result. But I never thought that it's going to even win something at that time. Yes, but that was the beginning.
Okay, so the beginning of what? What happened following that?
Whoa! After that. I don't know. Is there something that I never stopped, even so far? Never stopped because after won the image of the week, I started to develop something else, and everybody started to love my work. Of course, at that time, I just created my Facebook fan page. And I think I used to have something like 500 likes, something like that. But after this kind of experience, the fan page just explodes. Because in 1 week, I think I got like 5,000 or 6,000. It was amazing, And everything was because exposure I have in your forum, And after that, I decided to create, another project, an interior project, and some people from Italy, they like it. People from a magazine called 3D Artist Italy, and they asked me for an interview, and eventually everything started to change, and the exposure was bigger and bigger and bigger. and never stop. Even nowadays, I thought that was the beginning of everything. After winning, the image of the week never stops, and that was like 5 years ago.
Okay, well, I'm so happy to learn that. That's great.
Yep. Yeah. Actually, that was a very, very important. I don't know how to say, like a very important part me in the beginning of my career.
That's so great. Okay, so let's jump to the current time. So right now, tell us a little bit about your studio. Is it still just you, or do you have employees? And I also know that you do training, right? You do training.
Yeah.
So
Actually,
tell us a little bit about what you do today.
okay. Actually, I have a small studio. I outsourcing with other people in other countries, especially the modeling or sometimes the rendering. But of course, I'm in charge of everything else. So I do like small, medium projects. I collaborate a couple of times with international studios, for example, like Bionics. I had the opportunity that work for one project for the Bionics guys. Right now, of course, I start teaching like 3.5 years ago. I decided I have a good base in order to share my knowledge and share my experience with other people. At the moment, I teach more rather than do commercial projects. I think it's something in the blood. My mother was a teacher. My father was a teacher. I really enjoy to teach. I really find fascinating. Try to discover hidden artistic skills in my students. So that is basically the reason that I decided to start to create online trainings, online courses. I have one post-production training and one Corona training.
Okay. So let me ask you this, and I've seen this over time as you share work on the blog. For example, you have 3 making ofs on the blog. I think it's you're among the ones that have the most making ofs posted on the blog, and the first one was, I think, the making of Crystal Box, which did rely a lot on post-production in Photoshop. And the most recent ones that you did, there's like a house at the dusk, and obviously Meteora. They are more pure 3D kinds of projects. So, and you also say you teach post-production and you teach Corona. So in terms of your own personal preferences right now, and maybe also what you think your students should be learning, what is your view about the amount of, post-production versus doing things in the render?
Oh, it's a very, very interesting question. I don't know. Depends of the artist. At the beginning, I used to feel more comfortable doing a lot of post production because it allows me, I don't know, maybe have more control exactly what I did. And the reason is because maybe was related with the rendering engine. At that moment, to be honest, deal with V-Ray, just in order to create some specific effects was really I don't know how to say, was the results are not exactly what I expected, right? And sometimes can take a lot of time, right? At that moment, I'm talking about, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. It was really hard to achieve something very solid I don't know, in an average PC. Of course, if you have a render farm or something like that, maybe you can try to experiment with something, I don't know, at that moment with fog that took a lot of time, or maybe, I don't know, a particle system and stuff like that. But for some reason, I feel more freedom in post-production. I know that I can recreate any kind of a specific particle effect, without spend too much time rendering. So basically, that was the reason that at the beginning I rely a lot in my post-production skills, right? Maybe because, as I told you, was the trying to optimize the time, okay, without expect too much from the buffer. But at the moment that I decided to change my main rendering engine to Corona,
Okay.
I discovered that eventually the technical aspect is so much friendly, so much easy to understand that basically I forget. And I can spend a lot of time in the artistic approach because I don't care anymore, for example, about parameters. And I'm not telling you this trying to describe my workflow as a, I don't know, like I don't really care about settings, something like that. I care. But I think that with Corona I have more freedom in the artistic approach inside the 3D, right? I can experiment a lot, and the results, of course, the physical reaction, the PVR aspect, it's so much simple to understand how to twist a little value, maybe in some, I don't know, like in the volumetric material, for example, I love to use. And the result is very, very, very close to the reality, right? And I can control all of this. So basically, Corona allows me to do the things that I used to do in post-production, but this time, of course, in the buffer. So that is now that is the reason that, for example, METEORA has a very, very few post-production process, only softer color correction, a little bit of lens effects, and just like that. And of course, you can feel more freedom at the moment that you work with particle systems like volumetric material, the lighting approach, of course. It's more, how can I say, it's different, it's completely different. And according to my point of view, even it's more accurate in Corona. But of course, it's just a tool. Always the idea that you have behind the project, the idea that you have at the beginning is very important. The process that not all the people realize that you have to do in order to start a project. Basically, that is the key. That is the most important thing. At the moment that you start to collect your reference, at the moment that you start to see, start to study color theory, the moment that you start to, to check artist reference, but not only, currently artists or CG artists, the moment that you start to study what people does 300 or 400 years ago. I have several favorite artists, like for example Canaletto, Giovanni Antonio Canal, among other artists that I really enjoyed. The approach, the color approach, the composition approach, and I like to apply all these styles with my currently workflow.
Okay. Are these topics you teach your students?
Course. Or yeah. I think the training is a very unique training because I'm not only focusing on the technical aspect. I show to my students that the technical aspect, you can control everything because it's a tool. But the most important part is the philosophy. How you start to face an architectural visualization image, right? Because sometimes I can take this like a math problem to solve, right? You have some variables, you have some constants, and you have to find a result, right? So I'm, the method it's very easy to follow. Basically, as I told you, you have to start collecting reference. After that, you start to collect reference basically for everything, because at the moment that you start to guess, you can lose a lot of time, and that is not the idea. You have to have, for example, reference for the composition, reference for the color approach, reference for the atmospheric effect, reference for everything. So basically, when you cover all the variables, you are not going to guess in any moment of the process, and that is going to save a lot of time, because you have to emulate, some specific reference. So this is a very, very usual approach in my personal project, and of course commercial as well. But commercial has a lot of limitations. Of course, depends on the client. But in personal project, I like to be very methodic, with all the process. And of course, part of the creativity is like you can change your mind during the process, right? But you always are going to have, some kind of reference to choose from, right? And you can adapt or you can twist a little bit the reference, but in any part of the process, you are going to completely try to guess from zero, right?
Yeah. So you know what? That's interesting. So let me ask you this: when you started to work on METEORA, and let's use that as an example because people can see it. They can see the visuals on the blog, so they can relate to whatever you say right now. So initially, you had a different concept for doing that article, and then you came with the idea of that space with the kind of like it looks like it's an underground space with a open hole in the sky, and like you created that. So describe the process of coming up with that idea. Hopefully people will benefit from that insight.
At the moment when I sent you the first a reference board, and it was completely different because it was like a cliff, completely filled with vegetation and some kind of architecture at the upper part. But I thought that something was wrong because the idea was trying to use the Megascan's high poly 3D models as the main characters. And I was thinking that maybe it's going to be a waste of resources, because you can feel any 3D environment using another kind of 3D assets. You're not going to waste, the quality of the Megascans models. So I thought, this is the wrong approach. I have to create something where the 3D model, has to be the main character, right? So I was searching, on the web, a lot of reference, and I found something very interesting on Tumblr, and was something like a box, with a lot of vegetation inside. Of course, like with a very alive characteristic. Everything was green, small rocks and those plants, and I think. I seen this before, This is called vivarium, right? Okay. And at that moment, I started to browse on the internet, and I found so many references. But all the vivariums was, like a green, very alive characteristic. Everything was alive inside the vivarium. Even you can find some small animals living inside, between the vegetation. And I thought, this is very usual. This is very common. And as a part of my philosophy, I never kept the first approach because the first approach is the most common approach. The first idea that you come to your mind is always the first idea that everybody thinks at the same time, And I thought I can twist it. And what about if I create something different? What is the opposite to do or design something that is already alive, something dead, Okay. So I decide to take the after scene, for example, the so many references related, so volcanoes. I start to realize that maybe create some volcanic approach, could be something interesting. But I would like to create something volcanic, not even directly involving, I don't know, maybe people can start to think I would like to show some lava, inside. No. I was just twisted once again. And at that moment I thought, okay, I can use some kind of dead scenario, no living vegetation inside. Everything has to look, in that sense, everything has to look related, like some kind of volcanic rocks, dead pieces of wood, dead trees, everything has to be related, okay? No living vegetation inside. So I jumped straight to the Megascan's website, and I decided to download some specific kind of assets, and all the assets has to follow this rule, okay? No living vegetation on it, right? And mostly, of course, everything ends using rocks, dead rocks, basically. And I found these beautiful volcanic rocks, and I thought, this start to look like a meteorite, like a meteorite. And so maybe that is, the correct name. And I start to assemble everything like a puzzle, right? Everything starts to look like a puzzle. At some point, I thought, okay, this is the right approach, because all the attention is going to be in the highly detailed 3D models of Megascans. And at that moment, I just started to think, okay, this is the right path. I'm doing good. This is the right path. Now, the first part of the challenge was done. I found the right idea. I found the right approach. Now comes the second part, and that was the really, really challenging part. Okay, I decided to create this challenge in order to have a different light approach and a very specific composition for every single shot. At that moment, I had no idea that it's going to be like 10 or 11 images of the project. I just relayed that maybe it has to be like 4 or 5 images with 4 or 5 different lighting approach, but eventually I start to test, I start to discovering, and I start to push to the boundary the lighting, right?
Okay.
I found so many references. The first approach was like the UFO lighting, and that was very classic inside of, I don't know, when you can have when you visit, I don't know, like a museum or something like that, some kind of lighting, always drop above,
yeah.
I don't know, and
from above,
from above. And I decided to recreate this one, because I found in a reference, and I put a lot of emphasis to put all the direction of the lighting being, over the rock and over the dead tree, and works. It absolutely works. The only thing that I have to do is just twist a little bit the light, add a lot of volumetric fog in order to have the correct physical reaction, because a lot of people don't realize that if you want to have this kind of physical reaction, basically the photons, the light particle, has to hit every single volumetric particle on the air, and that is going to create a path, right? You cannot have this kind of a specific result in under any other kind of situation. That was the reason that at that moment I was experimenting before to start METEORA. I was experimenting a lot with volumetric material. So at the moment that I start METEORA, basically, I in some way I can say that like I'm mastering how to control the volumetric material, of course, using the light. And that was the beginning. When I start to have this approach, the only thing I have to find is reference about the temperature, reference about how the bloom and glare has to look in real life. And sometimes I found it that this, in terms of a commercial approach, is an error. Professional photographers, professional architectural photographers, they found this an error. Flares.
Yeah, they try.
Bloom.
They try to avoid.
Exactly.
Try to avoid this. Yeah.
Ironically, this is the kind of characteristic that I was looking for in order to create a more natural approach. That is why METEORA is like a hybrid project, like a half with a commercial characteristic, but at the same time, with some natural lighting approach. And it's ironic that sometimes characteristic like chromatic aberration, vignetting, that are considered as mistakes. Ironically, these mistakes gives the naturality, and the reason is because in the 99% of the amateurs, non-professional pictures, these errors are present. So the human brain start to realize that at the moment that you create a rendering or you create an illustration, you start to use in a very subtle way chromatic aberration, vignetting. Basically, the human brain recognizes these as a photo.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a very thin line the moment that you use chromatic aberration and vignetting in order to try to emulate something natural, right? A lot of people exaggerate the use of these characteristics, and of course the result looks like a bad quality photo. So it's very, very, how can I say, you have to be very careful at the moment that you want to use this. You don't have to rely entirely about using chromatic aberration or vignetting in order to try to describe something as a natural. But of course, in some cases, works, and helps a lot. I don't know, CG artists like Bertrand, he uses a lot these kind of characteristics, in order to describe a more natural feeling inside his work. It works, but of course you have to develop a more accurate approach. You have to know when and how apply it. And the ironic of this, one of my mentors at the academy told me that when you apply an effect like this ones, if you want to, apply it in the correct way, you don't have to realize until you turn on or turn off the layer. I don't know if you understand this. You only have to realize when you turn off, but during the effect is turning on, you don't have to feel that it's there. It's something really hard to describe, but it has to be something very, very subtle. Okay. After check so many reference, I found the right reference for the temperature and start to develop eventually every single shot, and every single shot was like a start from zero. Because different approach, different composition, different lighting approach, different amount of volumetric line. Every single Peter Guthrie HDRI can behave with a different reaction according to the amount of fog, according to the composition that at that moment I took as a base. So with every single shot was at the beginning was like wow, okay, now I'm from zero, so I have to develop this and that. But eventually, for example, when I reach the blue hour, the blue hour was one of the most beautiful shots of the entire project, and I decided to do something related with that. I never seen in any forum, in any website, an approach using the moonlight, right?
Yeah.
Of course, the technical approach was so easy. I just put an sphere, at the top part, but try to deal with the volumetric material and try to find the right and perfect light diffuse effect. That was the challenge. The right temperature. I've seen so many references, and I realized when the fog is in the environment, not only the contrast is going to change, even the temperature and the diffusion of the light is completely different. Has a completely different light behavior and shadow behavior, and that was basically, my guide at that moment in order to recreate a good approach, using the moonlight. And of course, even the last shot has a very minimalistic approach. Everything is just dark and only two warm lights at the background in order to rescue the silhouettes, in order to rescue the shapes of the rocks and the shapes of the tree. It was very challenging. I push a lot myself in order to have these beautiful light transitions at the back, because at the moment that I think that I have to light up something, I never decide to light up in a very standard way, and I never thought that the perfect lighting is when the light reach until the last corner. No, the light has to be involved shadows. I know that it's very crazy, but realism is not about the amount of lighting. Realism is given about the amount of shadows that you dare to leave in the scene.
This session is sponsored by Quixel, the makers of Megascans. Quixel is on a mission to scan the world, offering us an all-encompassing library that we've dreamed for so long. You've heard the story by Quixel founder Teddy Bergsman in session number 3. If you didn't yet, you should. Visit the Megascans library by clicking on their link or banner in the show notes and explore their full environment packs and individual assets you can use on your next project. Technically, okay, when you work on each shot and you start each shot from zero, like you say, so I'm trying to understand the way you work on making these images. So you're using Corona Render. You probably have it in interactive render mode, right?
Yeah, I worked the entire time using the interactive mode. I think it's the most easy way to achieve a more specific result.
Okay. And what kind of workstation have you used? I'm trying to give the listeners a little bit of, kind of like a reference towards the system you were using while you were doing interactive render. And if you can tell us how responsive was that experience when you play with the light, you move it around, you change temperature. Was it, the feedback came in fast enough for you to... so the artistic process is not been interrupted?
Yes, at that moment, it was very fast because I'm using the 3D Megascans models, and I think the word is they use like a baked textures. Okay. You don't spend too much time calculating, with these kind of models. So everything starts to work very, very fast, Of course, at the moment that you use a depth field effect plus volumetric material, of course, it's going to get a little bit noisy and a little bit slower, but I expect that, But in general terms, it's very responsive. The interactive mode, I love it because there is no restrictions. I'm not going to compare with any other render engine, but there is no limitation. I mean, you can have hundreds of, of millions of polygons. You can use it with millions of polygons in terms of vegetation. And it's going to be very responsive as well. In terms of lighting, you change the value of the lighting, and you are going to see at that moment, any kind of change relating with lighting, any kind of change relating at the moment that you change the value in the materials, whatever you want, is going to be very responsive. There is no limitation whatsoever because everything is happening at that time. So I can take a lot of advantage of that because I can move every single parameter, with a very accurate amount every single time that I want to twist any value. So that's amazing. That's amazing because it allows me to perfectly set up everything correctly without spending too much time, doing steals, like I used to do using another rendering engine. So everything works very, very, very good. That's the reason that I love with Corona, because it allows me to see everything in real time. Even using, volumetric material. For example, you can twist a little bit the bloom and glare values, and you're going to shape a different glare shape. You can blur it, you can exaggerate it, you can increase, decrease the values, and all of these you are going to see in seconds. Even applied color correction using LUTs inside the Corona buffer, because it's really fast. Change the opacity of the LUT. Is in that moment. Everything happens in real time, and I just love it. It allows me to be very creative and forget about the technical aspect.
Do you get this similar vibe or feeling when you work on commercial projects? Do you try to instill that kind of process, and do you actually succeed, or is it something that
I always work with interactive mode, no matter if it's something commercial or personal. I always follow this workflow because it's really cool when you can see you change something and you can see the feedback at that moment on the screen. There is nothing that can compare with that, right? And if I'm going to spend like 3 or 4 or 5 hours working in any specific project, the whole time I'm working using only the interactive mode. I never stop. I only stop, for example, if I'm going to merge something, or if I'm going to create, a proxy or some kind of process that sometimes can take a lot of RAM, or can take a lot of pure performance. So if that is inside of the process, I like to stop it, in order to avoid to crash, because I cannot push too much the interactive, because of course can crash. There is some kind of limitation in the performance, but of course this is something very exaggerated. I don't know, maybe if you are using, let's say an example, if you are using forest, right, you can make a limitation with the camera, the visibility, right? So if you have entire forest environment and you you dare to move the camera, and the camera is related with the visible limitation, of course it's going to crash. Of course it's going to crash. So I don't really recommend, do that. But of course, if you're going to change any parameter on the camera, exposure, ISO, focal length, of course you can do it. And this is not going to be related. This is not going to affect too much the performance in terms of RAM. Of course, with Corona, the more RAM you got, the more stable the software is going to be.
Okay. So what other interesting tools or pieces of software or content you use on a daily basis? So besides the render engine, any other thing that's interesting?
Yeah, I like to use Sticker shaders. I found it very interesting because I took Sticker shaders. Sometimes I took like a shader base, because you can take any shader and you can twist it, right? You can change the maps, you can blend that, you can create a layer materials, blend materials, and you can use as a base and you can twist it according to your needs. So most of the time, if it's a commercial, I like to call it generic commercial project, so you can use this kind of materials and you can twist it, and you're not going to spend too much time trying to create from zero. Or you can take the anatomy of one of these materials that you find interesting, and you can replace the maps, and you can, optimize your time, and you can save a lot of time. Because I always think that if there are several companies that they sell 3D models, or they say this kind of material libraries, I mean, why not use it, And why not try to take some kind of advantage and optimize times, because everything in this industry is related to optimize time. The faster you can develop a project, the better the result you can get. Everybody's going to be happy, you and your clients.
Okay. So what tip or what tips would you give someone starting out in architecture visualization from all that process that you described? If you had to pick one thing that is the most important thing, that if someone would invest time perfecting it, he will get the biggest return. So what would that be?
At that moment, and after this, all these years and all this experience, I really being obsessive with physical reactions. I think that's the key. Physical reactions and the artistic approach is that the key, to be honest. When you start to discover how the world works, how the light behaves, how the shadow behaves, you are going to discover a new, different world. At the moment you start to study this day by day, using, I don't know, if you want real photos, reference, and you start to understand that how, for example, interior color palette can affect the light behavior. That is not something that you can find in a tutorial on YouTube. In the tutorial, maybe you can learn how to use this light, how to use how to apply the HD lighting technique. But nobody's going to tell you that. Nobody's going to tell you that sometimes, just a small example, brighter colors is going to bounce better the light, and darker colors are going to absorb the light, and that is going to change completely the light behavior in a scene. And how you can take advantage of this inside the process, that is part of the philosophy that I like to teach. But I like to teach this because in some way I discovered that, as I told you, the physical reaction is important. It's one of the most important. And the other side, when you understand this and you can relate it, or you can mix it with a very, very strong artistic background, that's it. You have the 50 and the 50%. I highly suggest study what artists used to do, as I told before, like 300 years ago, 400 years ago, because you're going to realize that at that moment, and of course right now, that is pure art, right? Everything else you can learn. You can learn how to use the software. You can learn how to use the hardware, but discover what kind of philosophy the artist used to use, in order to create a famous painting. That is the challenge right now for me. And that is something that I highly suggest, Maybe the background of the artist can affect how he is going to develop some specific project, I've discovered, for example, that some artists, depends at that moment they are living in Europe and in America, his style, of course, changed because this kind of specific characteristic, the environment, how they think. Maybe you can discover that some artist was very depressed at the moment that they create some amazing piece of art, but you don't realize that when you start to work in architectural visualization. That's like the hidden part that most of the people don't understand. How the artist's mind and how the artist's near experience can affect the final result of any specific project. So right now I'm very obsessed with that. I'm trying to discover what is in the artist's mind at the moment that the artist creates something very unique. Because the technical aspect, as I told before, you can find it. Some kind of philosophy as well you can find it, or you can develop your own philosophy based in your own experience. But what is inside of the mind of the artist, that is something completely different. And basically, you are going to realize that that has a lot of influence at the moment that you took the decisions, at the moment that you are developing a project. Everything can be automatically using the software, but for some reason, at the moment that you decide use that color or this temperature or that contrast, has to be based on something. So what is that something? you know. Why you decide to choose that kind of decision inside the process is because your mind works in a very specific way at that moment, you know, and that is the variable that we cannot control entirely. So it's very interesting right now, the twist that I discover, you know, during especially these last 8 months that I've been into this specific job. So that is basically my suggestion for all the people that who want to start or maybe improve the workflow. You know, start to looking for answer in the usual places. I'm talking about the website and YouTube. You know, try to find your answers to answers in something else, something that nobody thinks that, you know, is the usual approach.
Yeah. Okay, that's great advice. Tell us a little bit about things you do besides creating images. What other hobbies or passions do you have that you do on a daily, weekly basis?
I like to, since I was a child, I think I like to express my creativity in several ways. I like to do mud painting. You know, I really love to do mud painting. I know it's very related to post production, but sometimes I like to do mud painting. I like to play the guitar. That kind of activities release my creativity in different ways. You know, if I create, for example, if I create a melody in the guitar, and I start to discover new kind of chords or try to experiment with new chords or progressions on the guitar. You know, that's like free my mind a little bit. In the other side, if I want to release the stress, I like to do trail running. I started to do trail running like 3 years ago, and that helps me a lot to feel a little bit more comfortable in the physical aspect, you know, with my body, with my mind. And it's a very, how can I say, this create a less stressful situation at the moment that you have to be in front of your computer like 4, 5, 6 hours a day.
Okay. What is trail running? Describe.
Trail running basically is running on the mountains. Here in Ecuador, I live in the Sierra region. So basically the Sierra region is surrounded by very high mountains and some volcanoes. Some of them are active volcanoes. Actually, there is an active volcano near to my city, like 45 minutes from here. I live at 2,600 meters above sea level. So it's a very, very high altitude. And sometimes when I do trail running, when I go to the mountains, sometimes I reach 4,500 meters above sea level. So at the moment, you push a lot your body, you know, because there is, of course, less oxygen at that height, and that push your, you know, the boundary. Push your body, your mind, your attitude. You know, you have to push yourself just in order to try to run at that height. But of course, I really enjoy it because it's very challenging, and I really love it.
Okay. So at this point, just before we reach the closing of the interview, I will ask you: did you get a chance to listen to the previous sessions on the Spectrum page?
Yes, I check all of them and I love it, all of them. Yeah, very, very, very good content, very interesting content.
Okay, so there's, go ahead.
Yeah, I found one really interesting. I think is the resonance space. I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I found it very, very interesting, very nice.
Alex and Ian, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that was a really good one. And I asked them, and I asked also the guys from the Boundary and all those sessions that I recorded but haven't been posted yet. So there's this segment that I call the elevator pitch. In your case, you could pick which topic you'd like to maybe relate to. So you do visualizations, but you also do training. So let's say you're stuck in an elevator with a potential student or let's say client, dream client or a potential student of yours, and you had 30 seconds to capture his attention so that he knows what it is you do and he wants you to teach him or he wants you to do the project for him. So what would you say in those 30 seconds?
Well, I would say that I can offer him something that he cannot find, eventually he is not going to find in any website. And that is my personal philosophy. No matter if it's for a commercial approach or if he wants to study with me. So I'm really sure that I'm going to offer something completely new and completely different.
Cool. That was on spot. Very nice. And so to wrap it up, tell us a little bit what is next for you. What are your plans for the future, for your own studio, for the teaching that you do? What it is that you hope for and expect, like 1 year or maybe more ahead?
At this moment, I'm going to keep my online trainings, the post-production trainings and the chrono training, of course. And I'm looking for some experience outside. I've been living, of course, here in Ecuador my entire life. I've been living in the UK for 1 year, and of course, I really enjoy the culture in Europe. I really find it interesting. So I think the next step maybe is going to try to find opportunity outside, abroad. I don't really know if it's going to be exactly Europe. I would like to go to Europe again, or maybe North America. I'm not really sure. So I'm going to find, for sure, I'm going to find an opportunity in the future. So maybe I'm going to keep with my studio as a Tresde. But of course, it's going to be a little bit with limitation in terms of time. But I'm really sure that the next step is going to be living abroad, of course, with my wife, and try to get an opportunity in some studio, because right now I think, and I feel that I'm very how can I say, qualified in order to share my knowledge and
join a team.
Join a team in a studio. I think that is going to be the next step. So I'm not going to, as I told, I'm not going to close entirely Tresde, as we know so far. But of course, it's going to have a little bit of limitation. Because I know from some friends that work and study is going to take all your time, basically, right? Mm. Almost all your time. That basically is going to be the next step in my near future. That's it.
Cool. So if someone's looking and finds you interesting, and then there's an opportunity here to explore. So that's great. Okay, so where can people find out more about you? Please tell us. Links, social media links. Share with us so people can follow up on this session with your stuff.
Other people can find my Facebook fan page. It's called Tresde Architectural Visualization Studio. I have a YouTube channel as well, with a couple of demo lessons about the trainings that I teach. I have a Behance portfolio. You can visit my Behance portfolio. You can find it as a Tresde, TRESDE, and I have an Instagram account as well. So I like to most of the time I like to keep all the social media very, very active. But during the last, after Meteora, I stopped it a little bit. The personal projects, because as I told you, right now I'm into a different approach. And I think I'm going to start with something new maybe at the end of the year. So stay tuned. It's going to be, of course, a very, very interesting project. It's going to be related with, of course, something that I never seen before. It's going to be a very fresh approach like Meteora was. So it's going to be very interesting. I would like to give a clue. The name is going to be Destructura. That means something that comes from destruction. Okay, so the idea is going to be see a beautiful thing in in something that is going to be destroyed. So basically, that is the concept. I'm going to start the project maybe at the end of the year. It's going to be ready for the next year, I guess. So it's going to be, I hope it's going to be, has to be something even better than Meteor, I guess.
Cool. So that's interesting and something to look forward to. So thank you very much, Santi. It was a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to meet you sometime soon. So do you plan to travel maybe to some conferences in the near future that I can know about, and maybe others, so we can meet you over there?
Yes, I think for the next year I'm going to travel to Mexico. There is a couple of CG events that I would like to go. So the next year I'm planning, go abroad and try to finally, get in touch with all these amazing people that I discovered during the last year on Facebook. Amazing friends, amazing colleagues. So the next year I'm going to be a little bit more active in that aspect. I expect to travel a little bit more. I would like to attend, for example, to this conference in Vienna. D2 conference. I know this year.
It actually started today when we do this session.
Yeah, it is today and it's going to be tomorrow. I would like to go, for example, to this year because the coincidence is going to be my birthday at the same time. But, sadly, I couldn't go. But I'm going to try the next year. I'm going to do it with a lot of time because I need some kind of visa requirements. So I'm going to start all the paperwork at the beginning of the next year.
Cool. Okay. So really, thank you very much for taking the time on a Friday. Ryan. And till next time we talk or meet, have a good one. So bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That concludes this week's session. Big thanks to Santi for taking the time to do this interview. You can find session highlights, links, and more in the show notes on thespectrum.com. Please send me any feedback you may have about the show and future guests you'd like me to interview. Have a great week, everyone. Be good. Do good.